special guest this evening is Susan Sheppard, and I'm very excited to have her on tonight. Let me get you her bio. Susan Sheppard, a native of Doddridge County, is a writer and artist living in Parkersburg. Susan is the author of a number of books based on paranormal subjects. She grew up just a few hills away from the November 14th, 1966 Partridge Mothman encounter and remembers her sister coming home from school talking about the red eyes in the barn from the previous night at the Partridge farmhouse in the small community of Center Point. In 1996, Susan created her famous Haunted Parkersburg Ghost Tours, and shortly thereafter, she was given the original November 3rd, 1966 reel-to-reel audio tapes when local resident Woodrow Derenberger was interviewed on local television about his encounter with the alien Indrid Cold the previous night at the intersection of I-77 and Route 47, 1 mile south of Parkersburg. The tapes were given to her upon his retirement by Glenn Wilson, the reporter who interviewed Woodrow Derenberger on live television. Sheppard has since then given the Mothman Museum the Derenberger Indrid Cold tapes on permanent loan. She still owns the tapes, but they are housed in the Mothman Museum. Sheppard has appeared on a number of television shows, Mysteries at the Museum, and movies, Eyes of the Mothman about the paranormal. Most recently, a remake of the 1932 movie White Zombie was recently released by Rag and Bone Productions, in which she wrote the screenplay and was the executive producer for. At the festival, Susan will be talking about her various experiences and expertise on the Mothman, Indrid Cold, ghosts and hauntings, and other paranormal mysteries throughout the Mountain State. And I'm so excited to have her on tonight. Please welcome Susan to the show this evening. Good evening, Susan.
Good evening to you, and I'm so excited to be here as well. I mean, I've been, grew up near the very first Mothman sighting, so I've been involved in this pretty much all of my life. So,
oh gosh, yeah,
a life of strangeness.
I'm telling you, yeah, you're definitely almost like a spook baby, kind of an MIB baby yourself. So I have to kind of dive into this whole thing because this is part of your life, so to speak.
It is.
And you are an expert, in my opinion, in this area. So let's get started and let everybody know how you got pulled into this story and how you acquired those tapes.
Well, I acquired the tapes. I got pulled into the story as a very young child on November 15th, 1966. The day after that, there was an encounter, a man by the name of Merle Partridge that lived very close to my home. His daughter, Mary Partridge, went to school with my sister, and I remember my sister coming home talking about Paula Partridge's dad seeing these red eyes in the barn the night before. And then, after that, there was a huge flurry of Mothman sightings all over West Virginia. I was a very small child, but even at that age, I was very, very interested in this subject matter. And I just stayed with it over the years. And later, after I moved to Parkersburg, I married the station manager at WTAP TV here in Parkersburg, the NBC affiliate, and the man who interviewed Woodrow Derenberger about his encounter with Indrid Cold. That's one of the more mysterious parts of the Mothman story. It's a very odd story because it not only involves this 6.5-foot creature with like a 10-foot wingspan and these red eyes. There was a number of UFO sightings and UFO encounters, as well as appearances of these men in black. And this pretty much happened. There was just an enormous amount of these things happening in the state from 1966 going into 1967. And because of my ghost tour, these tapes were given to me by a man who was retiring. And they were the full interviews with Woodrow Derenberger with WTAP, which they were interviewing him on November 2nd. His encounter with this alien who said his name was Indrid Cold. That was about 2 weeks prior to the Mothman sighting. But Mr. Derenberger was also having these encounters with these men in black. So it's just a very strange story and very hard to put it all together. But later John Keel came to the area. He was traveling through, and he stopped and he researched this story and wrote his famous book, The Mothman Prophecies. A real important part of that story, of course, was the Partridge family sighting, and also, which is a family that I knew, and then later the Woodrow Derenberger, the Indrid Cold part of the story. After moving to Parkersburg, I received these tapes and also met his family members and interviewed them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fascinating story. I mean, it's incredible. Go ahead.
I've entered a number of the Mothman witnesses, and of course at that time, our house began to have extreme paranormal, poltergeist activity,
Hmm.
objects moving, and we also had footsteps on the roof, and it was very odd. I was a very small child, but I remember it all. And even at that age, I was very open to these kinds of things. I think I was 4 or 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's pretty much how it all started for me.
Wow. So there was a definite correlation between the presence of Mothman, this character Indrid Cold, and also what you were experiencing in your house.
Well, I was experiencing in my house, and I think it was related.
Mm-hmm.
Later, after talking to Mary Partridge, they lived about 2 hills away from us, which had the famous Red Eyes in the Barn story with the dog Bandit that came up missing that had chased this creature. They also, this was a few years ago, but Mary told me also that their house also had a great deal of poltergeist activity. And Mr. Partridge went on to have other kinds of experiences that were never really published or recorded and really aren't well known, but I interviewed him as well.
That's fascinating.
Fascinating.
What is the history of the area prior to that activity? Is there anything unusual?
Well, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, a friend of mine, she says that New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia has the most intense paranormal activity of any of the states in the Union, and I don't know the real reason for that. I do know this, and that is many of the people that had encounters either with the Men in Black or the Mothman or even Indrid Cold have Native American ancestry. And of course, there was a Shawnee Native American chief named Cornstalk that actually cursed the area. He was murdered in 1777, I think it was. And a lot of people attribute these sightings of the Mothman with Chief Cornstalk's curse. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't know how I feel about that part of it. Mm-hmm. I'm part Shawnee and also part Delaware, and I know every time I go to Point Pleasant, I always get this headache. I mean, I love it down there,
Mm-hmm.
but I always have this horrible headache. And when we filmed the documentary, which is one of the best documentaries on the Mothman, called Eyes the Mothman, directed by Matt Pulowski. Mm-hmm. In part of the movie, he wanted me to touch the Cornstalk's grave. They have a monument there in Point Pleasant, and when I touched Cornstalk's grave, all of their equipment completely shut down. So
wow,
odd things.
Holy cow, that's impressive.
Also interesting too. Some of my DNA traces to Tibet, the Native American ancestry traces right to Tibet. And the Tibetans actually have a name and a belief in the Men in Black as well. They associate it with an underworld kind of place where these creatures leave and come out, these beings. And, the Men in Black really are not human. Mm-hmm. Got lots of stories on those, too.
Right. And it seems like you've encountered them yourself, right?
I have. Probably 1967, I was playing up on the hillside with my friend Jeannie, and we saw 2 men dressed entirely in black. One of them looked sort of Asian with his hair. It looked sort of a dyed blonde, which now would not be unusual, but at that time it was, and they were measuring something, on the hillside. And later there was a huge impression, a circular impression on the hillside. And also at that same time, this church bus was going past my house or my parents' house, and they called my parents, and they had witnessed this UFO hovering over our house. I have to say, strange thing about with all of the UFOs and the extraterrestrials, I think naturally I would not gravitate toward that subject matter. It sort of chose me, really.
Mm-hmm. Right. It sounds like you're definitely a contactee or even a hybrid, perhaps.
Right. Yeah, true. I think you're right.
You have the gift. Obviously, you're very powerful as a psychic and medium and craft practitioner and everything else associated, right?
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've worked as a psychic since I was about 12, 13 years old. So I'm a lot older than that now, so it's over 40 years.
Yeah, you look fantastic. You look incredible. And it's so nice to have you on tonight. I do want to ask you a little bit about, some people may not understand who or may not be aware of Indrid Cold, and also the encounter with Woodrow. Is it Derenberger? Is that how he pronounces his name?
I've been pronouncing it Derenberger for years.
Okay, I was just wondering.
Actually, the local pronunciation is Derenberger,
Okay.
and Mr. Derenberger also had Shawnee ancestry as well.
Very interesting. Well, for people who don't know that part, can you kind of walk everybody through what he encountered that night? And it wasn't the crossroads,
November
right?
2nd. It was about. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
That's
interrupt.
okay. You're
It
fine.
was about 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks prior to the first sighting of the Mothman, that a local businessman by the name Woodrow Derenberger was driving home from his job as a sewing machine salesman in Marietta, Ohio. We're just across the river from Ohio. And he was coming around the bend toward his farmhouse at Mineral Wells when he thought that there was a tractor trailer truck coming up behind him at a very high rate of speed without its lights on. So he swerved to the side of the road, stopped his truck, and much to his surprise, this truck became airborne and sort of just flew or rolled across Mr. Derenberger's panel truck and hovered straight down, in front of his car, his vehicle. And he realized it was a UFO, a spacecraft, which was a dark charcoal gray. It did not have any lights on. And as he's trying to gain his composure, the spacecraft hovered about 10 inches off the road. A man stepped out who looked like any ordinary man on the street. Mr. Derenberger said there was nothing unusual about his appearance. The man had a beaming smile. He had on a long, dark trench coat, was dressed in black, walked up to Mr. Derenberger's truck, and Mr. Derenberger began to hear these words: "Do not be afraid. I mean you no harm. I only want to ask you a few questions." And that is when Mr. Derenberger became afraid, because as the man spoke to him, his lips did not move. And he introduced himself as Cold, Indrid Cold. And they had about a 5 to 10 minute conversation. So that was very interesting as well. Anyway, so he had this conversation with this man called Indrid Cold, and was very mundane. It was, Mr. Derenberger later said, he felt like a lot of the questions that Indrid Cold was asking him, he was not really interested in. He was really most interested in keeping up the conversation with Mr. Derenberger for some reason. And after this conversation, I can tell you some of the things they said. It's rather mundane, but Indrid Cold said to Mr. Derenberger, "Thank you for answering my questions, Mr. Derenberger. We will see you again."
Mm.
And when he said, "We will see you again," the craft came back down and had been hovering about 40 feet above the highway. Indrid Cold steps up into the craft. It goes up about 70 feet in the air and then flies away at a very high rate of speed. And when Mr. Derenberger got to his farmhouse, he was late. His wife was worried about him, and she said later, Mrs. Derenberger said he could not have been any whiter if he had been lying in a coffin. And he describes this experience of being stopped by this UFO. And Mrs. Derenberger goes in and calls the West Virginia State Police, and that's how it all started. This was 2 weeks prior to the first sighting of the Mothman. And I guess when John Keel was in the area, Point Pleasant is about 60 miles south of Parkersburg along the river, a little over an hour away. While he was in Point Pleasant, he heard about this tale of Indrid Cold. And he recognized Indrid Cold to be a typical man in black, is what he recognized. And he interviewed Mr. Derenberger and actually ended up putting him in the Mothman Prophecies book.
That's very interesting.
That particular tale, though. And Mr. Derenberger did have visits from the men in black later. So West Virginia was a really crazy, insane place that year. There were so many UFO sightings and so many sightings of this strange red-eyed creature. And a lot of the things the witnesses have told me about the Mothman kind of vary and are different than what John Keel said in his famous book, Mothman Prophecies. He kind of used a poetic license, and I can go into that too if you want me to.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Well, one of the things, and this was also true of Merle Partridge, and it was true of Connie Scarberry. Roger and Linda Scarberry were the young couple who sighted the Mothman at the TNT plant, Point Pleasant, on November 15th, 1966. This was about an hour or so following the sighting by Merle Partridge. Now, this was 100 miles away, Center Point from Point Pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
They all described the Mothman's eyes as looking like red electrical lights.
Mm.
John Keel talks about the eyes looking like bicycle reflectors. When I talked to Merle Partridge, and many of these witnesses have since passed away, there are now very few of the original witnesses to the story. Mr. Partridge said, when I looked into the barn and I saw those red lights, red eyes, whatever you want to call them, but he thought they were electrical lights until this thing sort of lumbered up from the floor of the barn. And he was sort of overtaken with a paralysis and was unable to move. And he didn't really clearly see the Mothman. All he saw were the two red eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And the dog snarled and ran into the barn. And that's when Mr. Partridge and his son Gary ran back into the house. And it was about an hour later, the Scarberrys sighted the Mothman at the TNT plant. And of course, was horrifying. There was another couple with them. Mm-hmm. And after seeing this, but strange tale.
I'm telling you, it sounds like he made his rounds or whatever it was. Is the Mothman, did anybody ever have any communication with the Mothman? Is he telepathic?
Well, people claim to. It's so difficult to tell. I mean, after the story becomes so famous, many people have stories to tell now. Mm-hmm. But you kind of have to look at it in a pure way, with the original witnesses. It's possible in a way I think I did. I've been out on ghost hunts before, and people have taken pictures of me, and the ectoplasm beside of me, or the ghost mist, will be in the shape of the Mothman.
Wow.
So yeah, and I felt like I was very small, and I would hear something walking on the roof. It almost would sound like somebody had jumped out of a helicopter and landed on our roof. And we also lived up very near the power area for the town of West Union. It was very near the area that powered the whole town. And so much of this was near power areas where the Mothman was sighted. And I could sense him. And, so there was there was a presence, and my parents didn't believe me until they began to hear the same thing. So.
Wow, did that eventually go away, the noise?
Well, the walking on the roof, yes. But you know what was funny was there was also something like that had happened at our house like around 1960, where a previous family had lived there, and they had actually called the police and found these muddy footprints going up the side of the wall. So I think it was around a little bit before that, but the most intense activity was from November going in 1966 going into December 1967 was when the most intense. But people claim that, but it's really hard to tell.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And people send me pictures of Photoshop Mothman on the bridge, but it's not real. So.
What a bummer. Yeah, that's really interesting.
People go out looking for the Mothman. They get high registers and things, with their equipment in the TNT area. But to my knowledge, I don't think there's been any sighting that's been verified in Point Pleasant recently. Mm-hmm. But, there's been other kinds of creatures that are very similar all over the world. They had a sighting of a red-eyed creature in England called the Owl Man back in the late 1980s. And, if you look at the Jersey Devil, there's even similarities to the Jersey Devil. And I do dream of the Mothman. I still dream of him.
Wow. How often do you have those dreams?
Oh, probably had one about 5 years ago where I encountered him up on the hill near my childhood home, and his knees were on backwards. It was strange. I just sort of saw him walking away. There was a sighting in the late 1980s here in Parkersburg on Quincy Hill, where a young couple was driving up on Quincy Hill, and this wing went across the windshield of the car. And when the wing withdrew, this huge creature, it was like insect-like creature, sort of walked across the street. It was a young couple. They hadn't heard of the Mothman. And
Mm-hmm.
when the young woman went home and described this experience, she said the knees were on backwards too. The knees were backwards. And
Wow.
her mother said, that sounds like the Mothman. She didn't see any red eyes. She only saw the creature from the back. So it's very mysterious.
It really, really is. When the
But
knees are on,
it does seem to have a connection to, extraterrestrials and
that's what I was going to
UFOs.
say. Yeah, that's what it reminds me of. And also the fact that it's always foreseen or shadowed by the MIBs, right?
Yes,
So
very
they're
much.
either tracking it. Do you think they're connected to it in communication, or are they just tracking it or shadowing it?
Even when let me tell you something really odd. Even when Jeff Pulowski was filming Eyes of the Mothman at Point Pleasant, that would have been, oh gosh, let's see, it's 2017, maybe 2010, I guess, when he was filming that there. It took him a few years. He encountered two men in black down by the Ohio River. They came, they questioned him, asked him what he was doing. He said, "Oh, I'm making a documentary on Point Pleasant." And
Mm.
they said, "Well, Point Pleasant is our most favorite place in the world. If you ever talk to a man in black, they're extremely stupid. They will say contradictory, stupid. They talk like children, for one thing."
Mm.
He said, "Oh, I'm filming this," and they said, "Oh, Point Pleasant is our most favorite place in the world." And they said, "But we've never been here before." But the strange thing, when Matt did Eyes of the Mothman, when he went back home to New York, he got very ill and was in the hospital for a while. So even John Keel said there's some danger into looking into the Men in Black and these types of things. He really cautioned people.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeannie and I that had the encounter with the Men in Black up on Shannon's Knob is what it was called. We've had lifelong headaches.
Mm.
And if you remember Gordon Smallwood in the Mothman Prophecies movie, The Farmer, that's Woodrow Derenberger is who that is. Now, Mr. Derenberger was not a farmer, but he also had the terrible, if you remember in the movie, he had the terrible headaches.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Derenberger had the terrible headaches after his encounter with Indrid Cold. Mr. Derenberger's daughter, Tanya, has terrible headaches. So John Keel said there's some danger in it.
Very interesting. Is that like a psychic drain? What do you think that is as a reaction?
It could be a sensitivity to, the electromagnetic waves. Could be
Mm-hmm.
one thing. Some people are more sensitive than others. We might have gotten a big dose of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sounds like
that's
it.
possible too.
Wow,
Yeah, yeah.
that's
So
really
I don't
interesting.
really. It's funny. I don't really go out and I research these things. I don't really go out and search for the Mothman. I don't look for the Men in Black, even
Mm-hmm.
though I think it was about 15 years ago, I had a man in black stalking me, though.
Whoa.
It took me a while. Oh, I've had so many strange things connected to the men in black. I mean,
That's interesting. Can you
yeah.
elaborate on the one that was stalking?
Well, what was really odd was he had an amazing resemblance to Richard Gere, a young Richard Gere, and he had that, and so did Indrid Cold. Now they're described to look either Caucasian or part Asian or part Native American. Even though they look primarily, they might look a little Eastern European. They might look like they have a little Slavic in them or something, with almond-shaped eyes and sort of olive complexions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this guy was coming on the ghost tour. That was the time I was playing some of the interviews with Woodrow Derenberger, and he would come dressed in a long, dark trench coat. And really, he was an exact description of Indrid Cold. Now, it took me seeing this guy a number of times. I had a book signing, and he came to one of my book signings, and he said, well, one thing he said was, he assisted with brain surgeries. I thought, they don't do brain surgeries around here. I thought that was such an odd thing to say. Yes, he assisted with brain surgeries. I thought, this is just some wacko stalker guy, And he talked to me for a little while, and he told me, interestingly, he was a Scorpio. Well, November 2nd to November 15th, if you were born in that time, you would be a Scorpio. He looked about 35 years of age, too, which was about the same description, of Indrid Cold.
Mm-hmm.
And my book was on astrology, by the way. And he said, "Oh, I've got to go find my brother." And I would just see him everywhere. I would go to a play, and he would be sitting right beside of me. one time I ordered a pizza and he delivered it.
What?
So I know it was just bizarre, and so it took me a long time. I mean, there's more to this. I should probably write a book on it, but
You
there's more
should.
to this. So I have lots of sightings, and he said his name was Billy, but he spelled his name Billi is how he spelled his name, Billy, like that. And then I saw him, probably 6 or 8 times, and they had a local art auction. And he bought my artwork, and I never saw him again.
That's interesting.
So my artwork may be out there in outer space somewhere.
That's really interesting. Wow.
But,
yeah.
And we were, I was getting strange phone calls at the time, and it sounds like I should be open to everything. People think that we believe in anything that comes along. We just believe in it, and they don't understand that many of us in the paranormal, in the metaphysical side of life are usually much more skeptical. I mean, when I get ghost pictures and things, I never expect much of anything from them. I'm not expecting anything. So it usually takes a lot to convince me of something. But I was getting calls, and I thought they were prank calls. They would be about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. This is at the same time that this man in black, this Billy, was sort of stalking me. And I would pick up the phone, and there would be a voice that said, this is really weird, I'll do the sound. It went, hi, just like that.
Wow.
I'm thinking somebody's just pulling my leg. So I just hang up the phone, and I get a couple of those calls. So I star 69. I don't know if you have that in Colorado, but I star 69 to get the number. It was a Point Pleasant number, so I called the number, and it had been disconnected. It wasn't in service. I only know one person in Point Pleasant. That's Jeff Walmsley, that puts on the Mothman Festival.
Wow.
Well, a few months later, we were at the Mothman Festival, and my friend and I, my friend is a home health care nurse, and we were sitting with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and we were talking about the Men in Black and Indrid Cold. And Virginia had a new phone, so she didn't really know how to use it yet. So someone kept calling her, and she was afraid it was one of her patients. And when she would look at the callback number, it said 111111111. It wasn't a real number. So finally, when she got home, she figured out how to play her messages because her phone was new. She said, "You're not going to believe what was on my phone." And I hadn't told her this story. She said, it was just this voice saying, hi.
What?
So, yes.
Wow, how interesting.
Yeah, so we were sitting there talking with Rosemary. Rosemary's kind of an expert in that, too. I mean, she's at the festival every year, too. So just many strange things.
That is very strange. So do you think that's somebody who works for the spook agency, or what do you think that is?
I have no idea, except I think maybe it was meant. I think in a kind of a strange way. There's always an intimidating quality to the Men in Black, and even the Mothman. Even though the Mothman, was not ever known to ever harm anyone or even act in any kind of a harmful way or threatening kind of way, they always had this feeling of malevolence. I don't know. That could possibly be that they didn't understand, what it was. But there's always a feeling of malevolence to all of these. Even with the Men in Black acting as innocent as they did. One other thing about the Partridge's dog Bandit, that was ran into the barn after the Mothman's eyes. He was a 75-pound German Shepherd dog. Well, he never returned. He never came home. They never saw the dog again. Well, that very same night, as the Scarberrys were trying to outrace the Mothman, Linda Scarberry looks over to the side of the road at the city limits of Point Pleasant, and there's the dead body of a German Shepherd dog along the city limits. And that's how they tied the Partridge story with the Scarberry story, even though it was 100 miles away.
Very interesting. And it seems.
Pardon me?
No, I was going to ask you. It seems to me like the Mothman is associated with a type of a curse, or do you think that's the case, or no, or bad omens?
I mean, I could give meaning to this if I could try to give a meaning to it, but I know, or an explanation, but I know that would probably change.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was some kind of interdimensional creature, whether, from this, from the earth realm or other dimensions or outer space. I think it's more likely dimensions. I think John Keel kind of came upon this, later, thinking that perhaps these UFOs were not really so much from outer space, the Men in Black and the Mothman, as much as something that stepped through a tear in dimensions,
Mm-hmm.
or slipped through the dimensions.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so, what is the correlation between Indrid Cold and the Mothman, if any?
Well, there was no sightings. Mr. Derenberger never had any sightings. The Men in Black, and the fact that John Keel recognized the tale, the description of Indrid Cold, as being pretty much exactly like a man in black, and it only being 65, 70 miles away. And just just the strangeness of these stories.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone ever saw a man in black at the same time they saw the Mothman either.
Right.
So yeah.
That's kind of interesting right there.
They were all happening in the same area.
Right. It's interesting when you were mentioning the MIBs, they talk funny, they kind of just sound kind of stupid. And I remember in this interview with Indrid Cold, it sounds like he was asking him, "What are you called?" instead of asking him, "What is your name?"
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's
What
interesting.
Are you called?
Like he didn't understand anything.
Yeah, and when I was at this play, we were watching A Christmas Carol, and this guy, Billy, sat down beside of me. I was in shock. He had a seat right beside of me, and he looked at me and he said, "Aren't those costumes just beautiful?" Or isn't that just, it just sounded like a child. And there was a real innocence about him. I wasn't afraid of him, but he would come on the ghost tour, and he would come and he would listen to the tapes, and then he would leave. It took me a long time. I mean, I first just thought he was a weird stalker kind, very good-looking stalker.
At least he's good-looking. Yeah,
I mean, he sort of looked like Richard Gere. So, I mean, very good-looking stalker, but had him for a while. My sister did say one time, I was upstairs sleeping, and she said 2 men dressed in black came to the door and asked if I was home. And she said, "Well, she's sleeping right now." And she said they were kind of looking behind her, like they were trying to look inside the house. And she thought maybe they were Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that.
Yeah, they mask themselves as some. I've never mind. I can get into a story on that. Don't let them use your bathroom. That's all I have to say.
Oh, yeah, very strange things. There's been some accounts of them wearing bright orange lipstick, even. They try to mimic things on Earth, but in our realm, I say Earth, or in our realm, but they don't do it perfectly. They never do it perfectly.
So wild. They almost sound like they're mind controlled to some degree.
Yeah, actually,
that's
true.
Wow. Now, there is record of it. Now, didn't he vanish a little bit after he had his encounter with Indrid Cold? Didn't he vanish?
Often. And, about these stories also being in families. My uncle worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He was the only one in the family with a college degree. He was an engineer, and he had an encounter the same year near Dayton, Ohio, in the woods. It was almost an identical story to Woodrow Derenberger. And my uncle was an atheist. He didn't believe in anything. It was very embarrassing, He would put his atheist material around everywhere, our small town. But, I mean, he didn't believe in anything. And he said that the bodies at Wright-Patterson, that was true. And they forced him to retire.
Well, that explains why you were, constantly being followed, because if he had a connection to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I would suspect they keep an eye on their family.
I saw it like a couple of times a year. I mean, but yeah, but I think it kind of happens in families. It could be my grandfather had an encounter, 66, 67. He worked for the B&O Railroad, and there were some lights out, signal lights out, and he went out to check them. And as he was driving down this road, this ball, this craft or this ball of light just rolled across this Jeep. All the power went out of his Jeep, and he went down into a field. He lost power, and as soon as this ball of light went, was out of sight, the power came back on his Jeep. So,
wow.
So,
right up close encounters.
Lots of encounters in my family, yes.
That's
So
fascinating. So the one that was at the Wright-Patterson Air Force, he did confirm alien bodies?
he said that it was true.
Hmm.
He did not want to talk about. You got to understand that you were ridiculed. Mr. Derenberger was ridiculed so much he moved away to Cleveland. Didn't return until the 1990s, and then he passed away. When I started telling the story on the Ghost Tour in 1996, his family called me up and asked me not to tell the story, and which I did not. I stopped telling it until the movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
When the Mothman Prophecies movie came out, I thought, what the heck? It's not a secret now.
Right.
They said it embarrassed them.
Oh.
And then later, because the Derenberger's marriage fell apart, and he had a nervous breakdown. And this happens to many people that have these kind of encounters. They end up having a nervous breakdown because their experience is just so alien.
Mm-hmm.
People don't relate. They make fun of them.
Right. And he was in telepathic communication with this.
Claimed that he was. But
Yeah.
I will tell you, he claimed that he was. But I will tell you this: what his family told me, and that was Mr. Derenberger. His initial experiences with Indrid Cold were true, but he embellished the stories later to sell books. That's what his family told me.
Bummer.
So
that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that.
But you have to think about it in this way. And I've thought about this, and I know John Keel was very skeptical about Woodrow Derenberger's story, whether it was true or not. But he would have had to have been a prophet to have known all this stuff was going to happen, hit the fan, and like 10, 11 days later, he did not know.
Right.
Also, it was his wife that called the West Virginia State Police. He did not. He did not call anyone. He did not seek out any publicity. The media sought him out.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gave the live television interview, which you listened to the very next day.
He sounds very sincere in that interview.
Right. Yeah. I've probably listened to that 100 times.
Yeah.
You can hear if you listen closely, you can hear his knuckles rapping on the table in emphasis. Knuckles rapping, if you listen very closely. He also did a drawing of the spaceship, and that came up missing. And Glenn Wilson also told me they had the videotapes as well, whatever they would have called videotapes, or the film as well. Those just strangely came up missing of the interviews. And the audio tapes were the only ones that he had. He thought maybe the cleaning lady threw them away, but I don't know.
Wow.
I did give those to John Keel before he passed away, too.
Oh, you did?
He was very skeptical. He didn't know they even existed. I think he thought they were something, I had dreamed up, but they were not. It's very interesting to look at the old reel-to-reel tapes. They've got UFO tapes, and they're down in the museum in Point Pleasant. Really, the only actually artifact from that time, other than newspaper clippings. They've got a lot of newspaper clippings and handwritten eyewitness accounts, and a lot of props from the Mothman movie, Mothman Prophecies movie. The Derenberger, the UFO tapes, are probably the only artifact that they have from that time period.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And those were almost thrown away. Mr. Wilson was going to toss them in the trash can, but he thought that I might like to have those.
Oh, I'm so grateful that you got your hands on them, right?
Exactly.
Wow, people don't know what they have.
About that, and when you think about the strangeness of that, of growing up near that sighting, and then those tapes just coming to me.
Yeah, I don't believe in coincidence at all.
No.
Not with your background. Not with just from what you told me about your childhood. You've had some very interesting experiences and anomalous activity. And it does sound like it's been through your family bloodline, for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Actually, on both sides. Yeah, very much so.
Well, that's wonderful.
And the Partridges also, they had ancestry Blackfoot Saponi, which was a Siouan. It was an early, the Sioux Native Americans were in the Ohio Valley. They were eventually pushed out west, and they were the only Siouan tribe that was left in West Virginia, Blackfoot Saponi. They were in West Virginia and Virginia, and that's what the Partridges are. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it really is. And I hear that more and more, that a lot of contactees are of Native American descent. A lot of them are.
Right.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe it's the supernatural kind of design work, and I always call them star people anyway. So it's that natural connection and correlation to the cosmos, perhaps. But very, very interesting. And I was going to
Yeah.
ask you a little bit about. I love the way you described the crossroads, and I heard you in a lecture not too long
Oh,
ago.
okay.
Can you go into that with everybody here? Because I don't know if people are really familiar with the depth of what the
Oh, well,
crossroads represent.
I mean, the Woodrow Derenberger encounter with Indrid Cold goes all the way. Well, it's all over the world. A belief in the crossroads, and that is a place where human laws do not apply. It is outside the realm of human laws. Nothing can nothing. There's nothing predictable that happens at the crossroads, and it goes back to Hecate, the goddess Hecate. And did you know that's where birthday cakes came from?
Wow.
Birthday cakes, Hecate cakes, were set out at the crossroads in Greece with one single candle, so Hecate could find her way to the cake in the dark. And that's where the tradition of putting birthday candles on birthday cakes are, the Hecate cakes. But so Hecate is the goddess of the crossroads. And throughout all over the world, there's stories about the meeting of a dark man at the crossroads. And you can, in the old story, Robert Johnson, some people say it's Robert Johnson, others says it was his brother, Tommy Johnson, I think it was, who sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads to become the greatest blues guitarist, in the world. They say in hoodoo culture of the Mississippi Delta, there's a belief that the devil hangs out at the crossroads. Now, when we're talking about the devil, we're not talking really about the Christian Satan. Actually, it's Legba. It would be Legba. Do you know who Legba is? It's the guardian of the crossroads in voodoo, African as well, African and hoodoo and voodoo culture. He's a trickster spirit. He's not really evil, neither good nor bad, but anyway, Mississippi, the devil hangs out the crossroads, and you can strike a bargain with him, but you have to agree that to sell him your soul, and a lot of times it means your life will end, at a young age. So the story is Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, and he is the one that wrote Crossroad Blues, but he only lived to be 29 years of age. Crossroads were very important in hoodoo culture among musicians and gamblers mostly, and that was you would go to the crossroads at midnight to meet the devil or Legba or the dark man at the crossroads, which would appear as a big black man, not necessarily an African American man, but a coal black man. And he would ask to see your banjo or your guitar, and he would tune the guitar. Sometimes he would trim the musician's fingernails. And once he would hand that banjo back to you or your guitar, and you would play that, you have struck your bargain with the devil. Now, if it would be a gambler, it would be dice or it would be cards, and he would roll the dice between his hands, the big black man at the crossroads, and hand them back to the gambler. And the gambler will then, of course, have good luck in gambling or become rich. And then, anyway, so that's the story of Robert Johnson's Crossroads, which, Eric Clapton covered that tune as well as many people. And been sort of bad luck around that when you think about it. But it not only was that tale in Africa, it was all over Europe, and the same belief that you would meet a man dressed in black or a man dressed in dark clothing at the crossroads, and you would bargain with him. And to me, and then basically your life would just sort of go awry. Everything would just sort of go to hell in a handbasket. And I had to think it's an exact crossroads where Mr. Derenberger was stopped by Indrid Cold. Right. He was dressed all in black. And also, Mr. Derenberger's life went to hell in a handbasket. After that, his life just fell apart.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. That whole connection there. Yeah.
So we kind of see these we experience these things in the way we look through them through the eyes of our own culture. So, I say in my book, if you're an African American man and you're living in Mississippi, it's going to be Indrid Cold would probably be the devil at the crossroads. You'll see that as a devil.
Mm-hmm.
In 1966, you might see it as an alien. In Europe, it might be a vampire. They said vampires hang out at the crossroads, looking to steal your immortal soul. They said they will carry their shrouds to the crossroads, looking for victims. They say that the only time the crossroads are safe, this is from Europe, it's all over Europe, is on, Samhain or Halloween night or, that time of year. And that's the only time the crossroads are safe.
Mm-hmm.
Is on Halloween night for people, human beings. But the Hecate is associated with the crossroads, many gods and goddesses, as well as Legba, the voodoo or the African god. He is the god of the crossroads, and that's gateways. And that, again, is a gateway between worlds. That's what the crossroads is thought to be.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I totally believe that, too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of activity.
Not a lot of crossroads anymore, though. You don't have to go very. They were rare. They were rare at one time. We have crossroads. I think I have crossroads all over my neighborhood.
Right. Yeah, I always think about that too. Yeah. Very much so.
And of course, with the hoodoo and the witchcraft thing and all of that, you dump a lot of your after you're done with some of your magical, if you're casting spells and things, and you want to. You're done with the spell, or it's taken place, or whatever it's come about. That's one place to bury your the objects or the items that you used in your spells. Best place to put them is bury them at the crossroads.
Mm-hmm. And hope nobody digs them up, right?
Nobody digs them up.
Yeah. And so, with your background, is your whole family into the craft? I know you probably come from the magical family.
I come from a magical family. They wouldn't even know what the craft was, or even what a psychic was. Back long ago, my grandmother was a psychic. She didn't even know what that meant. She said that she saw tokens. That means she would see symbols that would predict things about to happen. But yeah, there's lots of psychics in my family. But it is strange. The family's kind of divided, and I don't look. Talking about the craft and Wicca and paganism, I have a very controversial view about witches. I think witches are born; they are not made.
Agreed.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I do not think it's a religion. I think you are a witch the same way you are an artist, or you are a musician, or you are anything. It is a gift and it is an ability. And being a witch is different than just being a psychic. Being a psychic means that you can receive information, interpret information. Being a witch means you can cause things to happen. That's the difference.
Mm-hmm. Right. And how much of the activity that you have around you do you think you create through your psyche?
I don't really like thinking about that. I try to stop my thoughts of, don't get mad at this person.
Oh, that's funny.
Don't start having bad thoughts.
I was wondering about that.
I've always noticed, I don't know how much you're into astrology, but I'm very much a 12th house person. That's a Pisces, and I'm not a Pisces, I'm a Cancer, but I'm very 12th house, very Pisces, so I'm very peaceful, and, I don't believe in harming others, but I notice that when people harm me, something very bad will happen to them. 2 people have been struck by lightning.
Wow. That's good. I mean, not good, but something's protecting you.
I mean, when it happened one time, I thought it was kind of weird, but when it happened the second time, I began to really worry. I know I don't want that to happen.
Well, don't you think it's maybe
they both survived. They're all right.
Maybe it's just a guide or some kind of a ancestral shield or something.
I think it's protection of me is what it is.
Well,
I'm not involved. I don't. The hexing thing that went on. I don't know how you feel, but I don't believe in hexing.
You know what? I think it's so not appropriate. Yeah, I'm very much not into that at all. And actually, I agree with you. You don't hex people, and honestly, it's going to boomerang because it's just the way the universe rolls to some degree. So yeah.
I don't even want to. And the thing that happened to these 2 people that did some really mean things to me, I didn't wish anything bad upon that. That was the strangest thing about it. I thought, well, okay,
It's kind of like universe.
All right. I guess you're just out of my life now. All right, that's the way it is. And then, but the funny thing is after they got struck by lightning, they started being really nice to me.
Oh, so they know you have power. Well,
But
respect,
I don't know.
Susan, respect.
Maybe it's a coincidence now. I don't know. It did happen twice though.
I think that's pretty interesting right there. So you said you are a Pisces?
I am not. I'm a Cancer,
Okay.
but I've got Leo rising, and a lot of my planets are in the 12th house. I don't know how much you know about astrology. That gets a real Piscean kind of flavor to the chart. Yeah.
A lot of sensitivity too. Yeah, I'm Aries, but I have a lot of Pisces too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I've got the double Aries, double Pisces. Yeah, so I can be nice and fierce at the same time.
Well, being fierce is a good thing. I mean, I think in a way, that's probably my lesson I need to learn, and that is to fight back. You should fight back. You know, my daughter, she's very feisty too. She said, "Mom, you know, I mean, it takes so much energy to hold all that in or bury it or keep it down." She said, she just tells people off, and is more direct. Scarlett has Mercury in Aries. She's a Taurus, but she's got a little Aries in there too. So I just don't hold it in. It takes so much energy to do that, Mom.
Yeah, it's true, doesn't it? Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to head for a break, everybody. You're listening to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. My wonderful guest tonight is Susan Sheppard. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.